Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do.
Oh, hello there. I was just checking on the ships here in the big harbor. You know, we get many, many visitors here, from little fishing boats to giant super tankers. And you know what? I bet I have sailed on every kind of ship there is. Oh, yeah, I've been around ships most of my life. I remember the first time I got my first job aboard a ship. That was really something. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. Oh, God. Long hours and hard work, not to mention trying to stay standing with the waves rolling this way and that way. Oh, but I did. And you know what? Before I knew it, I had spent many happy years at sea. I remember when Theodore got his first job here in the big harbor. It was when he pulled his first ship. You know, he didn't think he was going to be able to do it either. It seemed like Theodore and Hank were always thinking about the day when they'd be able to go to the wide open ocean, beyond the harbor. That's when they'd have their own wonderful V words in bright golden letters, just like Emily the Vigorous, or George the Valiant, or Theodore the Vigilant. And of course, they were also thinking about what their V words might be. Theodore liked valuable, or even very valuable. Hank preferred volcano. Theodore knew it could be a while before either of them had learned enough to be given their own V words. After all, the most important step before being awarded a V was knowing how to pull a ship. Theodore had pulled barges before, and they'd both done practice pulls with Emily, but neither of them had ever pulled any real ships by themselves. It was time for the morning meeting, but none of the other tugs were there. The dispatcher seemed worried. He looked at Hank, then at Theodore, and then back around at the busy harbor. "Let's see," he said. "Emily's still out on the ocean. She's supposed to be back very soon. George is towing Tex, the oil rig, down the coast. Oh, he won't be back for a few days. And Foduk's busy moving ships anchored in the middle of the harbor. Well," he sighed, "that means we have a big problem. We have a cargo ship arriving soon, tugboats," he said. "Her name is Julia, and there just happens to be room for her today at her favorite dock. But with all the V-tugs away," continued the dispatcher, "there's no one to pull her in." "Theodore," whispered Hank. The dispatcher kept looking around as if he hoped Emily would magically appear. "Well," he said, not very happy, "I guess that means tomorrow. I guess tomorrow will be a very busy day, tugboats. That's all for now." Hank whispered again to Theodore. "Theodore, this is our big chance. You and I could bring in that cargo ship." Hank was so excited he was finding it hard to keep his voice down. "Hank," said Theodore, "I'm not a puller. Not yet, anyway." "Well, you want to be one, don't you, Theodore?" replied Hank. "Yes, but," said Theodore. But Hank was still talking. "And the dispatcher said just the other day that you were doing a great job pulling barges. I'm sure he'll let you try it. Come on, Theodore. Ask him. Ask him." "What's all this about?" said the dispatcher suddenly. "Theodore can pull," said Hank. "He's been practicing a lot." The dispatcher turned to Theodore. "Theodore, do you think you're ready to pull?" "Oh, my," thought Theodore. "What's Hank started this time?" So, almost before he knew what had happened, there was Theodore, sailing out to the mouth of the harbor with Hank. Sure enough, they were on their way to meet Julia, the cargo ship. "How does it feel to be the tug in charge?" asked Hank. Theodore still wasn't sure if he knew what to feel. Not very sure at all. "We better think, Theodore," Hank continued. "After this, you'll get your V word for sure. How about voyageur, off to all the seas in the whole wide world? And I'll be Hank the Volcano. Roar," said Hank. But all Theodore could think about was being the tug in charge. Hank was sure there wouldn't be any problems. "You won't be alone, Theodore," he called. "I'll be helping you." Well, for some reason, this made Theodore feel even less sure about the whole thing. "Hank, you forgot to tuck in your anchor again," he said. "That's what Emily and Foduck are always saying," said Hank. "See, Theodore, you're already a great tug in charge." Well, Theodore couldn't help smiling at his friend. Hank just wouldn't give up, would he? "Well," said Theodore, "I guess I should at least try. Maybe it'll be okay. I hope." So off they went again. And again they started thinking of V words. Volcano, Voyager. They knew that this would turn out to be quite a day. The day that Theodore Tugboat would pull his first ship. Soon Theodore and Hank had arrived at the mouth of the harbor, close to the mighty ocean. Julia, the cargo ship, was just arriving. She looked very big. Very, very big. She also looked unfriendly. All of a sudden, Theodore's doubts returned. The huge ship just stared down at him. "Hello," said Theodore. How do you do?" Julia didn't answer. Theodore tried again. "My name is Theodore, and this is my good friend Hank. We're here to take you to your favorite dock." Theodore couldn't think of anything else to say, so he just waited. Finally, Julia said, "Fine. Pushers go to the back." Hank and Theodore looked at each other, and then at Julia again. "Oh, thank you, Julia," said Theodore, who always tried to be very polite. "But I'm your puller today." Well, Julia was not impressed. She thought Theodore was just a little tug. "I've pulled before," said Theodore, trying to make Julia feel better. "And what have you pulled before?" asked Julia. Barges, mostly," replied Theodore. Now, Julia wasn't sure that Theodore could be a puller, but she knew it was important to get the fresh vegetable she was carrying unloaded. And after all, it was her favorite dock that was open today. She looked way down again at the two tugboats. "Well, I suppose I'll have to at least let you two try." "Hooray!" shouted Hank. "But I hope you won't make any mistakes, or I'll have to complain." "Oh, yes, I understand," said Theodore bravely. But inside, he knew that if Julia complained, it was sure to hurt his chances of being given his V word and being able to go out on the ocean. "Let's get to work, Theodore," called Hank. "I'm waiting," said Julia. Theodore started off back into the big harbor. He found he really did like how you could see everything when you were up in front. And he felt very important, leading such a big cargo ship into the big harbor. He even gave a little toot-toot to Hank, just like the tug in charge does to signal, "All clear, carry on." Just then, Pearl the pilot boat arrived to help guide the ship safely to the busiest part of the harbor. But with Pearl there, Theodore began to worry again. He wanted to make sure he did everything just right, and the pilot boats always watched very carefully. After all, that's their job. "Well, Theodore," said Pearl, "your first pull, is it?" "Oh, yes, ma'am," answered Theodore. "Will you arrive on time?" asked Pearl. Theodore looked around. Hank was in position. "Well, everything's fine, I guess. We'll be there in no time," he said. Pearl went to check on Hank. Willie's Island in the middle of the harbor was just coming into view. "You'd better start turning," Julia said to Theodore. The turn, the time, being the tug in charge, there's just so much to remember, Theodore thought. Theodore was getting closer and closer to Willie's Island. "Turn," said Julia again. But this wasn't the way Theodore had practiced with Emily. They always turned a little closer to the island. That was because sometimes other ships were coming around the other way. Theodore knew he had to give them lots of room. "Careful, Theodore, careful," said Pearl. But now, Theodore wasn't sure what he should do. Maybe the others were right. After all, it was only his first pull. The island was getting closer and closer. Theodore knew that Julia would be upset with him for not turning when she wanted him to. But then he remembered. He was the tug in charge. Suddenly, Theodore knew what he had to do. He continued on. Julia was so worried she couldn't say anything. Then, at just the right moment, Theodore gave one quick toot to Hank. That was the signal to turn now. The two tugs began to swing around the island. Much too close, thought Julia. Just as they were rounding the bend, there was a ship heading towards them. Theodore tooted again. Stop turning! And Hank tooted 2 times back to say yes. Well, it's a very good thing Theodore had waited to turn just when he did. The 2 ships passed with just enough room to be safe. If he had turned any sooner, there might have been a terrible collision. Julia was silent. She must be wishing that Emily was here instead of me, thought Theodore sadly, and he moved on. As they went farther and farther, Theodore became sadder and sadder. By now, he was sure he'd never get to be a puller again. That's Emily tooting, thought Theodore. She must be back from her trip. Now she could take over. Oh, that made Theodore feel much better. He looked up at Julia. You know, for a moment back there, Julia said, I thought all my vegetables might become a tossed salad. But you did turn at just the right time after all. You're doing well. I am? Asked Theodore. Suddenly he wasn't so happy about Emily returning. He was just beginning to think he could finish the pulling job. Hi, Theodore, said Emily. When did you get to be a puller? She asked. Just now. I mean, today, Theodore said quietly. He was trying not to let Julia hear him. So he whispered to Emily, It's because there were no V-tugs around. I guess now that you're here, you should be the tug in charge. I think this tugboat is doing a fine job of pulling, said Julia. Well, Emily was very happy for her good friend Theodore. Of course he is, she said. Do you think this will mean I can be a V-tug, Emily? He asked. Someday, laughed Emily, and off she went. That night, Hank and Theodore couldn't stop talking about their big job. And Julia's cargo was very important, Hank was saying. She was carrying carrots and lettuce and bags of broccoli. You know, Theodore, interrupted Emily, if you were to get your V word for your job today, I know just what word it would be. What? Asked Theodore. He knew Emily always could think of such great words. Theodore the Vegetable, laughed Emily. Well, all the other tugs laughed too, and one by one they went off to sleep. All except for Theodore. That night he stayed awake a little while longer. He couldn't stop thinking about the next time he'd be the tug in charge here in the big harbor. Now, Theodore didn't get his V word for that assignment. No, that was just one small first step for him. The same as me learning to stay standing when the waves are rolling back and forth was a first step for me. It's called getting your sea legs. You learn to move back and forth with the ocean. But once you've got your sea legs, you feel like you can do anything. Well, almost anything. Whoa! Of course, on the ship, we try to remember to keep the door closed. Well, thanks for visiting here in the big harbor. We'll see you all again next time. I've got to clean this up. Oh, what a mess.